Welcome back. So Bilbo had to go fetch a lamp so that they could study a map. And on the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. "This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin," he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questions. "It's a plan of the mountain." "I don't see that this will help us much," said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. "I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it. And I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath where the great dragons bred." "There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin, "but it'll be easy enough to find him without that, if ever we arrive there." "There is one point you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is a secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map in this chapter and you will see there the runes in red. I'll show you that when I find the page. "It may have been secret once," said Thorin, "but how do we know this secret any longer? Old Smaug," that's the dragon, "has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about these caves." "He may, but he can't have used it for years and years." "Why?" "Because it's too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast," says the runes. "But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size. Not even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale." There's Gandalf talking to the dwarves and a rather interested Bilbo looking on there. Oh, there he is. There he is, Bilbo. "Seems like a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the county round, with all his favourite walks marked on it in red ink. "How could such a large hole be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon?" he asked. "He's only a little hobbit, you must remember." "In lots of ways," said Gandalf, "but in what way this one has been hidden we don't know without going to see it. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarf's method. I think that's right, isn't it?" "Quite right," said Thorin. "Also," went on Gandalf, "I forget to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is," he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. "Keep it safe." "Indeed I will," said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far we had no clear idea of what to do. We thought of going east as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, trouble would begin. "A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east," interrupted Gandalf. "We might go from there up along the river running," went on Thorin, taking no notice, "and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon, too far, far too often, unless he's changed his habits." "That would be no good," said the wizard, "not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off and therefore legendary. That's why I settled on burglary, especially when I remember the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins." Turn the page. "The burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans." "Well then," said Thorin, "supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions." He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map, and didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking all about this for hours? All the same, I should like it plain and clear, said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who try to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional, and live up to Gandalf's recommendations. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth. By which he meant was, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, well, said Thorin, long ago in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and we came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountains. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skilfully most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it. Not to speak of the most marvellous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that is what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them. And they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they're killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value. And they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dragons flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destructions that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most especially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of fire. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. No one escaped that way. The river rushed up in a steam, and a fog fell on Dale. And in the fog, the dragon came and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passageways. After that, there were no dwarves left alive inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, he has piled it all up in a great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later, he used to crawl out of the gate and come by night to Dale, and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat until Dale was ruined, and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain, and I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding, and cursed Smaug, and there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. By the way, there's Smaug and Thorin talking. Smaug and Thorin. When asked how they got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that, we went away, and we've had to earn our livings as best we could, up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we've never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we've got a good bit laid by and not so badly off, here Thorin stroked his gold chain round his neck, we still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I've often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thrall was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and my own way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, he said, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind, I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering and had forgotten almost everything, except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He's an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world, the one thing your father wished for his son was to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Here, here, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I've got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door. And dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we've talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed and an early start and all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham, when starting on a journey, fried, not poached, and mind you don't break 'em." After all the others had ordered their breakfasts, without so much as a "please," which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed, and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everyone else's wretched breakfast. The tuckishness was wearing off, and he was not quite so sure that he was going to go on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next door. "Far over the mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to find our long-forgotten gold." Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. There's Bilbo having a nap. There's Bilbo doing the dishes the next day. Does he look happy? Are you happy when you do the dishes? Do you guys do the dishes? Do you really? Really? I'm not sure. I'm going to have to phone your parents and find out. Are your kids doing the dishes? Anyway, here's chapter 2. Roast mutton. Up jumped Bilbo and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room, and there he saw nobody but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe that the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he'd rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved, after all, to think that they had all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. "What would never thank you," he thought, and yet in a way he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age. So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start, and here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you a message because they couldn't wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephant," said Gandalf, "you are not at all yourself this morning. You've never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what he read. "Thorin and Company, to burglar Bilbo, greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives, if occasion arrives and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. Trusting that you will be punctual, we have the honour to remain yours deeply, Thorin and Company." "That just leaves you 10 minutes. You'll have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either. Off you go." To the end of his days, Bilbo could not remember how he found himself outside without a hat or walking stick or any money or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands, and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was, and when he